Have you ever had that feeling, that your past is something you carry not just in your mind, but like deep in your bones? That some things that happened to you left a mark so profound it actually feels physical? Well, today we're going to dive into the incredible science that shows how our life story can literally become part of our biology.
This feeling is captured so perfectly in a story from our source material about a woman named Anna. For her, and honestly for so many of us, this isn't just a poetic idea. It's a real, lived experience where just a small reminder of the past can trigger this huge physical reaction. Your heart starts racing, you feel an emotional crash. It really feels like your body remembers, even when your mind is trying so hard to forget.
And that really gets us to the big question for this whole explainer. Is that just a feeling, or can our experiences, our joy, our trauma, our relationships, can they actually change us on a biological level? Well, the answer, it turns out, is a fascinating and massive yes.
All right, so let's get right into it. The science behind this opens up a whole new way of understanding who we are. We're not just talking about our genes anymore, we're looking at this hidden layer of biology that actually sits right on top of them.
And this field has a name. It's called epigenetics. Now, the most important thing to get here is that this isn't about changing your fundamental DNA code. Your genes are your genes. That's locked in. Epigenetics is all about changing how those genes are expressed, which ones get turned on, which ones get turned off, and kinda how loudly their volume is turned up.
I love this metaphor because it just makes it so clear. Think of your genes, your DNA, as the words written in a book. That text is pretty much fixed, right? Well, epigenetics is like all the punctuation, the bolding, the underlining, and the highlighting. It doesn't change a single word in the book, but it completely changes how the story is read and what it means.
Okay, so if epigenetics is the punctuation, what's the pen? How do these biological highlights actually get added to our genetic story in the first place? Let's take a look at the switches that make it all happen.
So it all comes down to these tiny little chemical tags, or switches, that can attach right onto our DNA. One of the most common ones is called DNA methylation, and you can think of it like a dimmer switch on a gene. It can turn the volume way down or even silence it completely. And what flips these switches? Our life experiences, things like stress, trauma, but also support and love. This is the very reason identical twins, who have the exact same genetic book, can grow up to be such different people. Their life stories add completely different epigenetic highlights and punctuation.
So how does all of this connect to really deep emotional challenges, like the ones you see in borderline personality disorder, or BPD? Well, this is where epigenetics becomes this crucial bridge between what we experience in life and what happens in our bodies.
Let's go back to Anna for a second. That feeling she had, that her past was written into her body. From an epigenetic point of view, that's literally true. Really difficult childhoods can leave these chemical marks on the very genes that control our stress and emotions. For Anna, it meant her whole biological stress system was basically on high alert all the time. Her body was biologically primed for a danger that was no longer there.
And this table, wow, this is fascinating. It gives us a peek into the specific genetic systems that researchers are finding are affected in people with BPD. And just look at how these changes map directly onto common experiences. You see marks on stress response genes? That can lead to that awful feeling that the stress just doesn't switch off. Changes to neuroplasticity genes can make it harder to learn new, healthier emotional habits. And yeah, you can see how tweaks to our serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin systems can influence everything from mood swings to how hard it is to trust people.
So, this all leads to probably the most important question of all. If our experiences can write on our biology, is that story permanent? Are these marks just set in stone forever?
And the answer that's coming back from the research is just incredibly hopeful. These epigenetic marks are not a life sentence. Our biology is not some fixed destiny. It is flexible, it's responsive.
This quote from the source material just says it all, doesn't it? Healing isn't just a mental process. When we have new, supportive, healing experiences, they don't just help us think differently. They may actually go in and change the epigenetic highlighting, literally altering the way our own genetic story gets read.
So how does this rewriting actually happen? Well, research points to a few really clear pathways. Psychotherapy, especially types that focus on processing trauma and regulating emotions, has been shown to actually reverse some of those harmful methylation patterns. Building strong, supportive relationships, that gives our brain and our body new data. Data that says you're safe, you're connected. And simply changing our environment to reduce those constant stress triggers, that allows our whole system to finally stand down.
Okay, let's just step back for a second and look at the huge picture here. Understanding epigenetics doesn't just add one more fact to what we know. It fundamentally changes how we think about mental health, about healing, and about our own potential for change.
So, if you remember anything from our talk today, let it be these things. First off, epigenetics finally builds that bridge between nature and nurture. It shows us exactly how our world gets under our skin. Second, your biology is not your destiny. It is a dynamic script and it can be edited. Third, this helps explain why two people can have the same diagnosis but have such wildly different experiences. They could have different epigenetic patterns. And finally, and this might be the most important one, it validates that emotional pain is not all in your head. It has a real, tangible, biological reality.
So we'll end with this thought. The science of epigenetics is telling us that while we can't change the words that are written in our book, we absolutely have the power to change the punctuation, to add new highlights, and to reread our own story in a completely new light. It shows us that healing can be biological and that change is always, always possible. The pen is in your hand.